All right.
So it's been actually more than a week since we last did one of these. We got caught up in things, I guess. So how's the move? Are you in LA or still in Chicago?
I'm in Chicago. Listen, okay, so me, it's a torturous thing. All of this stuff could take months for me. When I say I'm moving, it could be 4 months because it's on my mind all the time. So it's like with our scheduling being chaotic, if it were like we meet every Tuesday, 2 p.m., I'd be there and I'd be ready. But we're like, let's see when we can do this. So I have to be
Right.
emotionally ready to talk to you.
I understand.
It's not just like, doing dishes. So it's like when I'm getting caught up in my feelings with moving and oh fuck, dude, moving for me is traumatic. I let me think. I've moved.
You're leaving Chicago like for some time, right? Or is it just for a season or 2 years?
Well, I've moved probably 20 times in my adult life, maybe more, and it has not always been because I want to. And some of those times I've been run out of towns, or a broke artist where you get evicted, whatever it is. It's so there's these memories that carry with you, so it sort of fucks me up. But yeah, moving out of Chicago for good, I would hope. Who knows how life? I don't know how my life goes. I wish I had more control over that kind of shit. But I don't think I won't be coming back here on purpose.
When I moved out of New York, it was because of a relationship, and I traded off for San Francisco because I had ideals what San Francisco would be like. Got my 4 years of it. And is it different? Of course it is. Um, would I trade it off? Do I think there's a superiority things? One city's better than the other. Again, I think it's situational. I think it's a right time at the right place. Honestly, I just wish I had a space in Brooklyn.
Timing is everything. You're so right about everything. But with things that are of emotion or something, love, timing is everything, it seems. I moved back here. I didn't know why I moved back here. When I left Portland and I was leaving everything I loved. So it was really hard to move. And
Same.
I was again like run out of town. Like there was a conspiracy against me. And I remember leaving, being on the train, and all these people I didn't know were liking that I'd posted I was leaving. And they were all of the same group of people, very far left people thinking that I'm a Nazi of some sort. So they were happy to run me out of the Pacific Northwest.
I
And
understand. I
yeah,
mean, when I was in New York, same type of people. It's more like you're in their clique or you're not. And if you go, they don't care. And it seems like they're like a high school clique. They just don't want you at their parties and makes you feel like the entire city is that. But again, 9 million people. There's so much more than just 100.
yeah, no, yeah. You're right about that. I was going to say something that I forget now because I'm having trauma about all this stuff. But it's like it's not when you said they don't care. No, that's what I'm able to get solace out of. They do care. They care so much about me that they're happy. Like they're focused. They're determined to bother me. And so I have to understand. Like I had to, think about that a lot in the last 5 years since I left, or 6 years. That it's like that's another form of love, whether they like it or not. It's the same kind of energy they're putting into it. Like it's like they're obsessed with what I'm doing. Me, like, and normally I come from plumber stock. No one's going to give a fuck if the plumber leaves. And when
Well,
you have this group, a clique of people that are actually like acting like they don't care, but actively speaking about, I don't care. I'm glad that guy's gone. They care. They're invested. They've invested their life energy into me.
the benefit though about moving to a new city is that you take your roots with you and you start something as a pioneer. Just like the gold rush of 49, you kind of start your own thing. When I moved to San Francisco, that one quote by Oscar Wilde said, to paraphrase, if you haven't seen anyone in a very long time, chances are they're in San Francisco. Whether that means they're gay or not, I'm not so sure. But he wrote that before that. In our words, saying that the city of San Francisco was a place you went under hiding to do weird things.
Wow. Well, I know that when I moved back to Chicago, I didn't know why I was coming back here. I had like reasons, like I'm going back there because I have some friends there. I'm going back there because I need to try to figure out if I could make peace with my mother. I hadn't talked to her in 15 years, 13 years. And so, I wanted to resolve some of these issues. But being back here, I, I don't know if I understood this, but it was about coming back to my dirt and realize, like I lost myself somewhere along the way and realizing who I was and how I survived. Like as a Chicagoan, my dirt was important to come back to hear other Chicagoans talk, hear how they dealt with things. Because being a Chicago in the Pacific Northwest, you can definitely get guilt tripped because you're a little gruff. It's like, hey, pass the fucking salt, and they'll be like, oh, that's you're assault, you're assaulting me, or you're being too aggressive with the way you ask for salt.
I mean, only what 200,000 people are in Portland now. It's the size of Pittsburgh.
It's the
So,
size of a neighborhood in Chicago, right? It's the
right.
size of a fucking neighborhood. Like, so when I came back to Chicago, I realized, like, the fuck was I intimidated by a cow town from Portland? I survived Chicago. I lived on the streets when I was younger. I survived the streets of Chicago. That's not easy to do. This is a big, and then I realized how, like I was being made, it was something like tall men make more money. So I was being hammered with my height, and I'm 5'8" or 5'9", whatever the fuck TikTok short kings bullshit.
Mhm.
But I was being hammered with stuff like that when I came back. I realized like I'm as big as these fucking buildings. Like I'm big, and I'd survived this place. So I was like, it was good to come home and remember who I was and
I
where I.
mean, my parents, and I was born in Philadelphia, and my parents have a base in the Philadelphia suburbs. And honestly, that's kind of like the far east of the Rust Belt. So obviously, to get to Philly, you have to take the train, bus, or just drive over there. And of course, the weird part about Philadelphia is that it's hard, just like what Portland is. It's hard to call it a city when so much it relies on the next door neighbor. The next door neighbor being Seattle to Portland and New York City to Philly. So you kind of have this inferiority complex being built, saying, well, if something's happening, it's in downtown Manhattan, and it's 90 minutes away, and not in Philly. And if it does happen in Philly, well, that's a rare occasion. And I think the same thing about Milwaukee to Chicago.
Yeah, I come in with the superiority complex though, because when I go into small places, like I lived in Ely, Minnesota, I lived in all these, and like Chicago's bigger than San Francisco, Seattle, and Portland together.
You're
So
right.
when I go there, I'm like, what the fuck? You call this a museum? This is nothing. I'm sorry for you guys. This is what your art is. We have a Picasso downtown, so I come in with a superiority complex, and people don't like that. And Portland also is like this bullshit culture, like it's croissant culture, I'd call it. I was calling it the croissant culture because it's all these like, and I don't like to get into race stuff too much, but it was how it was. It was all these white people talking about what racism was. And I go, how would you know anything about this? You're from Portland. It's all white here. This is all white. Oh no,
Right.
we have a neighborhood. I go, no. In Chicago, we are actually mixed. This is the world in a microcosm. I'll be at a bus stop. I'll meet some from Egypt, Ethiopia, fucking Denmark, Germany, everywhere over the world on that bus stop, at one bus stop, all speaking their language. And you get on a bus, you're jowl to jowl with people of all colors, of all cultures. So we are really, we have a bird's eye view on this kind of stuff, where they're speaking out of what they've read in books or what they've learned in school, but they don't have any real world experience with it.
I think it's well known fact that Portland is the stuff white people like utopia. I mean, with a show called Portlandia, it pretty much hints that this is like the white man's paradise, or at least like you saw the croissant like ideal of it. And it seems way too. It's always made fun of Portland. It's even a classic Christian Lander stuff white people like city because
Yeah,
it has all the stereotypical stuff of that culture.
yeah, you could say it's well known, but I live more on the idea that to experience things is well known to me. I don't. I I miss local reporting. We in journalism there used to be something called investigative journalism and then local reporting, and you'd have local journalists, and you don't have that anymore, and that is severely lacking a person on the ground looking at what's going on right there. And so I'm more of have a journalistic type of thing where I want to see what's happening. And so to experience Portland, I experienced that croissant culture. It was funny. Like even their street art, the street artists there would go around, put stickers or paste ups and stuff like that. And then they'd go out for craft beers that cost $12 a piece. I was like, yeah, that's not street art. Street art, that no one has money. That's why they do street art, is because they don't have networking capabilities to get into galleries, stuff like that. It's just like they put art on the street. So
I
the
always
whole
think I always think to myself that Portland is the liberal part of Boise, because Boise's like 3 hours, 4 hours to the east.
oh
So
that
then it's like Portland. It's like you have Portland, Eugene, and then kind of Boise going to Greater Idaho.
I'm not familiar with Boise. The only thing I know about Idaho is I worked with the 14 Words people, and they lived
Right.
in a
That's what I'm saying because so much of Idaho wants to take over Eugene and like the rest of Oregon in that's old conservative territory.
I
And then you give that little sliver of Portland to just those liberals. And that's the joke. It's like, okay, Portland is just liberal Boise because we know how like neo-Nazi Boise is.
Yeah, what I found about Oregon and that area is even the, like, let's say you might say white trash or redneck or hillbilly, any folks I ran into that were like, and my family's that from Southern Illinois, but that's why I can understand the difference. It's experience. And to meet those folks out there, they were well read. If they were on a fishing boat, they were reading books. If they were at a logging community, they were reading books. And that's not like that in the Midwest. We don't have that here. And so I was surprised by that, and not that they were, I shouldn't say well read, they read, and maybe a lot of them read to confirm their biases and not shake up their biases. That's what I found too. They were able to quote things to back up what they had to say, but not much outside of that.
I think the transformation in California really begins at the northmost area. So past Bay Area to the west of the Sierra Nevada Alley, and that's something called Jefferson. So that's like Crescent City, California, Eureka. They basically believe that it's its own state divided and from California. So you get kind of like Clear Lake. So
Is
it's
that
like a
the Cascadia movement, right?
Cascadia would be more like touching Idaho, Portland. This is like right below Cascadia. This would be called Jefferson. So this is like the most topmost part of California. That I've been to that culture for like 3 weeks to a month being in Clear Lake. And that's basically Trump leaning. We're not Bay Area. We're definitely not LA or San Diego. And we're definitely not Sacramento. We seem to be cowboys out in Napa Valley. And that to me comes from that Boise influence, I think, is that it's so isolated that you can't say it's really white trash. I would say it's like cowboys lost in time.
That's where Jack London moved. The Wolf House is there. That's one of my, that's, I think, probably it is one of my favorite spots in America, and probably it is one of the most beautiful spots, if not the most beautiful spot in America. So that's where I'm looking to move, right around there. I
I
don't know.
really like well
I
the
don't know
thing
anything
is
about the culture. So
I would say that there's a 3 level hierarchy in North California. San Francisco, of course, being your metropolitan, cosmopolitan peninsula. If you can't live there, there's always Oakland, which I think is like low class Brooklyn. Then you get to Sacramento, which is, of course, the capital of California, but it's really more like a commuter town to start a family and then go to events in Frisco or Oakland. And then I would say there's one more city on that 3 hierarchy is Reno, because Reno, being next to Lake Tahoe, at least in Reno, you get kind of the hipster nature of Portland, the freedom from the Bay Area, but the seediness of Las Vegas. And having an international airport, the Four Seasons, Cowboy Town, Reno really does feel like a city you can do a lot, but it's kind of secret America. It's pretty much just if you can't make it in Frisco or Sacramento, Sacktown, you end up in Reno, which I
really,
always think that's why I always think, yep,
do you go to Reno a lot?
yeah, I love Reno.
Wow, okay. That's one of the other places I've been looking at moving. Like I go, do I move to Reno's so expensive for it being Reno? I was like, I'm offended by the costs. I was like,
It's because it's building up. It's a lot of people from the Bay and Sacktown
I
are
see.
being moved out and they go to Reno, and that's technically Nevada. So, and then you could cross the border without paying a toll. Plus, you're next to Lake Tahoe, who has a mansion in Tahoe, Mark Zuckerberg.
Right,
So then
right.
and also you have an international airport in Reno. So if you want, go to Japan. Go to
I
China.
see,
It's
I
right
see, I
there.
see, I see. Great observation.
Or you
Yeah,
want to go to New York City or Philly? Reno to Philly. It's so easy. It's only 10 minutes away, the airport.
right. So I was looking there as well. So you never know, but my plans are to move out to that area of California.
But it's becoming Reno is becoming more like a Portland, a second class because you have like a this is hardcore fest, the band 7 Seconds. There seems to be a blue collar, punk hardcore scene in Reno that's very dominated.
We're
And that's
doing
I
the
think from the Reno influences.
we're doing the next Witches
Portland.
Sabbath in Reno. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's like a little bit of an edgy Portland, Reno, because again, prostitution and gambling is legal because it's Nevada, but it's also there's a suburb and there's University of Nevada and there's an airport. And so you do have kind of the things you would have in a major city, but everything's in walking distance on the Truckee River, your wild horses, and you do have that cowboy flair, but it does feel a little outwardly like Las Vegas. So again, I do think Reno does have some charm to it. It's just very, I would say it's the end of the North California experience. If you can't live in SF or Sacktown, you're pushed to Reno.
Interesting. Interesting. Wow. So wow, you travel, you get around the Americas. Is
Mhm.
that what you're telling me?
Yeah, I mean, I seen because I was doing things in Reno too, just for vacation. I was hanging out in Tahoe for work, so I would go back and forth between Tahoe, Reno, back to San Francisco doing I had a job, which I don't have anymore, where I would do checkpoints for legal marijuana. And people would have to go through certain counties to say, hey, there's a truck with this legalized marijuana coming in. Is this allowed in your county? And then they say, yes, it is. Then it's a checkpoint. It goes from San Francisco to Reno, Reno back to Frisco. And it's like that every day. And that's like a 4 hour trip back and forth. So it goes to show you that. And then it's again, what's east of Reno? Well, you certainly got Sparks and Elko, but then it's like you get to Mormonville, Salt Lake City. So that gets a little weird and you can't even deal weed over there. So yeah, that's just some of the experience I've seen from it. So, but again, I think the reason why people don't move to Reno is that it's so far east. Uh, Again, your only connections are Sacramento or Frisco, and that's just a travel through the mountains, and it just feels like a different world.
Wow, excellent. Yeah. Well, I'm going to find out soon, I guess. So yeah, moving to me is a weird situation, and this time I'm trying to I'm purging all this shit like from my past, like a lot of times I'll make like what I've been making patches, pins, t-shirts, weird shit like that because it sells. And I'm like done with that shit. I'm sick of selling, trinkets like that. So, I'm just getting rid of all of that kind of stuff. And
I
so
forgot to say this, but I was in Atlantic City yesterday, and I was really impressed by that. When people think Atlantic City, it's weird because you have Philadelphia, and Philadelphia, technically speaking, covers South Jersey. It's the southeast end of Pennsylvania. It's not really of Pennsylvania. It's kind of on the borders, and so most people who call Philadelphia their home are from like Cherry Hill, south of New Jersey, and Vineland. The other city would be Atlantic City by the beach. And yet Atlantic City is kind of only built up by like the same Reno ideal of casinos, entertainments, and it's kind of just out the way. You have to drive from Philly an hour east and west. So it's very strange because when do you make the contrast between you? I was born and raised in Atlantic City. I don't know what Philadelphia is. Or is it Atlantic City is more like an orbiting of what Philly is, which is orbiting New York? And so just like the domino effect of Frisco to Sacktown to Reno, you have New York to Philly to Atlantic City. And I kind of just felt that where Atlantic City felt like it's isolated country by the beach.
Atlantic City, I always took it like as Gary or Hammond, Indiana, which is like a suburb, like a city next to Chicago, which is they're it's meaningless.
Uh-huh. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I get it. That's what I'm trying to relate to. Right.
But out of all things, Erasure will come and play there, which I saw last night. So it's like, okay, that's weird. Why not New York or Philly? Or it's because you feel like it, because it's probably cheap. You can make people go by the beach and it's funny. And sometimes I think things could happen if you just pioneer something. I mean, Burning Man is only, again, another reason why people go to Reno. Burning Man is an hour away up north.
Right,
So
but
that's why it's building up.
Erasure's playing in Atlantic City because they can't get booked into a big city. The Chicago,
Right.
New York's not gonna. There's no one that's gonna buy tickets there. So they're that same with like Motley Crue. They're touring, and I think they're playing Hammond, Indiana, the same the Atlantic City of Chicago, or Milwaukee. They're playing
Sandusky, Ohio. Yeah.
right. They're playing smaller markets because no one here cares about them.
Hmm.
You know,
I know. I just feel like the I just lost my thought there.
that's good.
I just thought I was just like, well, okay, what was the thought? Um,
Well, we're talking about Sandusky, Ohio.
yeah, so I was just thinking about the beaches. I just had a thought about Atlantic City that came in my mind and that slipped away. And
I know a
it
lot
just
of
has to
people
come
think
back.
that Gary, Indiana, and Hammond should be built up. There's a
Yeah, it's like see, Gary would be a commuter to Chicago. You only live in Gary to work in Chicago.
well, there's a guy who started Rockefeller Records with Jay-Z, and he's out here wanting to build it up, buy it all up, and build it up into a big city. I think he's right. He wants to
Hmm.
make it a big city again, and so we'll see what happens, I guess, with that.
But
Maybe
going back on the pioneering spirit, I think the reason why people move a lot, it's of course it's economic reasons, but it's also I think it could be from just somebody. If your friends move there, things become better. Like okay, it may be like Sandusky, Ohio, or better yet, Cleveland, Ohio. But if you have some friends that like music and you start in Cleveland because your friends are there, then all of a sudden it's no longer the Lake Erie city. And I like Cleveland because my friends are here. Probably a great example would be the band Option 30. They were kind of this pop punk reggae band, which then separated and they made a band called Slam Bamboo, which the guy Scotty has Scotty Italian Eatery out of Cleveland. Then they formed a band called, or at least two of the members called Exotic Birds. And here's the funny part: the synth player was Trent Reznor, and then he
nice.
formed Nine Inch Nails. So
Nice.
I'm saying that is because Option 30 is Slam Bamboo and Exotic Birds, they were all Depeche Mode knockoffs, but who was the main synth player? Trent Reznor,
Well, I
living
don't
in
know.
Cleveland doing that.
I don't think so. Moving for me, like what you just said, is a whole different class of person. So I come from a socioeconomic makeup that you can't afford to move. And so you stay in the same zip code always, like you're always there. Maybe you'll live with a friend, but you're there, you're stuck in this town. And so for me, moving has been not anything like what I've never moved anywhere where my friends were that I wanted to move. I ended up there. Like when I ended up in Ely, Minnesota, it was because I had a chance to move to New York to work with people, and I moved there to take care of my father-in-law. But then we were run out of that town, and we ended up on the Long Beach Peninsula in Washington because it was so strange there. But we just ended up there. And the
Right.
same Portland, we ended up there. But we didn't know it. We knew no one. I knew no one there. And so I
That's
had
what I'm saying. It's like,
oh, you said that but you said that you moved there because you have friends there. And
yeah, that's what I'm saying. The only way you can make Cleveland special is if you had a group of friends you grew up with,
ah,
or like someone from
I see.
college, and then it's just, or a girlfriend. That's how it changes. But if you don't have that, that's like Cleveland fucking sucks. And it's kind of well known.
Yeah,
Or Detroit.
I had to make a decision like, do I move to LA and without a ton of money, I would be in a neighborhood that would, as an older person, I can no longer fight like I used to. I can't, it's just those situations are gone for me. So I have to position myself in a place that I feel safe. And, I just don't feel safe in a big city, especially with you have to have a lot of money to live in a safe neighborhood in the city. You know,
Right.
that's the way it is. And so I live in a fine neighborhood now. And I don't feel threatened, but that's not to say I couldn't be easily overtaken.
Well, I think it's what's happening is that they made our economic situations where you have to pay to play to be near people like yourself. If you
Yeah.
want to meet high quality people, you have to pay to be in a neighborhood with those said people. And it's designed like that way in a top bottom process. We
Oof.
all know the artsy people supposedly are in Bushwick, Brooklyn, but the rent is like 2,800. So are they still there, or is it like a complete elite people that are out of touch what's say really going on in nearby Keensburg, New Jersey? Seems like everybody's moving to Keensburg because they can't afford Bushwick. And
Once
yet,
the
yeah,
once the rents go up in those art neighborhoods, the real artists move out and the art school kids move in, and it becomes
correct.
industry as usual. But yeah, exactly what you're saying there. It's a sad situation to have to pay to play. Here's the sad part I find about it. I've been go to therapy for 9 years, and so to be in a to hang out in my zip code or people that I usually would be comfortable with, it's hard for me to be comfortable with them now because they have so many weird dysfunctions or their coping mechanisms aren't mine anymore. I don't deal with that shit like that. So, like talking to my psychiatrist, I'm like, how am I ever going to meet a woman that's not so dysfunctional, like, stuff like that. She goes, well, the more in therapy you're in, the better again. I go, I don't think so, because in my zip code, no one has access to therapy or this stuff. So it's like,
Right, right.
we're not speaking the same language anymore. So I get women that are attracted to me that are like predatory or, I get love bombed. They get the narcissist. I get love bombed, all this shit. So I told her, I said, well, how I'm going to solve this is I understand the whole pattern now. So I'm just going to date them while they're love bombing me. And once that starts to taper off, I'm like, next. I just tell,
I've had
I only I only date people that are going to love bomb me. And once that stops, I'm done.
I mean, again, the only reason why I moved to Frisco was because I met a woman. I love her very much. I got her pregnant. I have a son, and it
Well,
happened in Frisco. Yeah. And
how old are you? How old are you?
I'm 32.
Nice.
So I'm just saying that most people my age won't do that. I mean, well, depending. But I'm saying is I had that window open, and it's like if I don't get in this window, I will none of this cause and effect will happen. So I had to jump, within that 4 year. It's been 4 years being in Frisco, and it's just like otherwise that butterfly effect would have not have happened. I would not have had a child or a woman, and I just have to go with it and just see what happens. Because again, if you are given that opportunity, people will jump on it. And then while certain doors close, other doors will open. And for when I was being bullied in New York, for who I am, I met a woman who's like, hey, I got a job in Frisco. Do you want to come with me? And I'm like, absolutely. Fuck everyone else. Even though, like you said, um, those people don't miss you or they care so much that they hate you. You kind of have to go away from that for a second just to pioneer yourself and then say, okay, what's Frisco like? And I've done some things in Frisco and Oakland. I played some shows, whatever, met some really interesting people. Is the culture different? Absolutely. Is it the same as the past? No. Can normal people come here? No. And then it's like, then you start to realize, wait, normal people live in Stockton and you can't even afford Oakland anymore, or they live in Reno. And that's why I've been obsessed with Reno is that working a job there, moving legal marijuana, it's like, okay, that's pretty crazy. Normal people live in Reno now, and that's becoming pricey. So you might as well live in Stockton or like not California or like Eureka or Crescent City, California. So
Right.
it's a lot of, like you said about Nirvana and like being in Seattle and you're driving the road. That's like what's like being in the Bay Area and that peninsula. You see why a subculture develops around that and what people were thinking, what you might call San Francisco values. And then you have to ask, is it still there? I don't think it's still there. I think it's a very privileged place.
Yeah, it's evolved into a very far left kind of like if at far right or far left, they're very similar. They want to control things too much. And so it's like, maybe communist or fascism. They're too much about control. And so the San Francisco of today I find to be very controlling versus it was more shrugging their shoulders at differences more than waving their finger at differences like, oh, that's wrong or this is right.
I
You
think
know,
it's because everything's privatized. Everybody has so much money that it's a vacation every day. And when you're on vacation every day, you don't care about other people. And because there's nobody, other people, and everyone's on vacation, there's no community.
you
There's no
pretend to
getting
care about other
together.
people. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah, I guess you pretend to care about people and you make rules and you tell people what's right and wrong. It's the same with Portland. That croissant culture is like very similar to. It probably comes from San Francisco. It was
Yeah.
Where do you get the best croissants in America? San Francisco.
Because if you're on Nob Hill and your neighbor may be John Waters or, Nancy Pelosi, it's like, okay, two contrasts, but they're doing their own thing, going to different places. They're not in the neighborhood. They just buy property there. So then what happens is nobody cares about concerts happening there or whatever. And if they did, they're just telling people outside of the peninsula to come in. And I mean, that's why there's no Oakland sports anymore, is because all the Oakland sports were bought up by Las Vegas. And East Bay was like the last remnants of like common people. Like if you count what's in East Bay, it's about under 2 million people, the size of Philadelphia. But they don't live in the peninsula. They have to cross the Berry Bridge to go over there. And so now that they don't have sports, it's kind of like it's because everybody bought up Oakland and Oakland's becoming another Brooklyn. So it's like, what's the point?
Yeah, that's crazy. Chicago's still cool.
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, from just hearing, I mean, as much as I want to go to, I will go to Chicago. I got to tell my wife to come. I really want to go to Chicago for many reasons. It's probably a good life to live from and especially near the Lake Michigan and just, it's like Michigan, right?
Yeah,
And
Chicago, a great town, a great town. It's just not for me anymore.
my only comparison would be it's hard for me to wrap my head around people who live in Milwaukee over Chicago. That would be the funny part because I always think like the reason why there's a Philadelphia, well, it's not because it was once the capital. It's because many New Yorkers who can't live in New York anymore start families in Philadelphia. So
That's
I
what
think,
Milwaukee was. Yeah,
and then I think Milwaukee is many people who can't live in Chicago move to Milwaukee to start families.
right.
But you're so like, but what? I mean, it's 90 minutes away. Wouldn't you be ever in Chicago? It's just gonna if Depeche Mode comes to Chicago, they're not gonna come to Milwaukee. So you're gonna have to spend, and that's always been the Philly conundrum is that if Depeche Mode comes to Manhattan, they're certainly not coming to Philly, so you got to go 2 hours away. So I always think that's annoying.
Funny with the concerts. Yeah, I lived in Milwaukee for a little bit, so it was cool because it was small, but
That's the
it
thing. So
was a
you have the
wild time.
pioneer spirit, like Portland is to Seattle or Milwaukee to Chicago, but then how much of the Chicago rubs off in Milwaukee? It's kind of strange. And when you tell normal people about Milwaukee, they get this kind of like weird, what are you, Canadian or something? Because it's so far north.
You're funny. Yeah, I don't like Milwaukee. I love Chicago, like I was saying. I love it here, but it's like for me, I understand Chicago too. And Chicago is an underdog town. They love the underdog, but once you have something going on, anything, they shine you on. They treat you like a dickhead, So it's like I have that problem because I'm from Chicago and I have legend here. And so I get treated like a dickhead where I shouldn't. There's no
Mhm.
reason for it. The only reason is because there's this Chicago vibe, like, oh, he thinks he's better than me. Same with like anyone who's ever made it, Smashing Pumpkins, Ministry, from my day, they left Chicago once they did because they became targeted. You became targeted, and you do like any of the hip hop people, they leave Chicago the minute they make it because everyone's for them, and then once they start to rise, people are like, we want what it's crab pop mentality here, totally. Like they want what you have. You have it because of us. You owe us.
Yeah, it's the weird regional identity shit. I mean, this is kind of what the topic is about. It's about like the absurdity of regional identity because that's what I kind of contemplated being in Philadelphia for like a quarter century is that Philly seems to be an undeveloped New York City with a fake Chrysler building, two fake twin towers, a low tier Ivy League school, and a train that goes to New York but costs $80. And
I
it
don't
just doesn't make any sense.
I think it matters where you're born. I think there is something about that identity. I don't know if there's a healthy part of it and there's an unhealthy part of it. I was born in Lubbock, Texas, and I was only there until I was a child. And I remember going back when I was an adult and I kept playing with the dirt. I kept playing with the dirt and person that was with me was like, "Do you remember anything?" And I go, "No, I just." And they were like, "It's wild that you're playing with that dirt like you know it." And I kept playing with the dirt, just rubbing it. And she goes, "Because when you were a child, you were probably just playing with that dirt." And I'm like, "That's probably it. That's all I was remembering was this red dirt." And so when coming back to Chicago, it was really good for me because I heard my tone. I saw how I look. And in Portland, I don't look like that. There's not a lot of people who look like me in Portland. And they are people who look like me here for whatever reason that is. And
I can totally relate on genealogy because my mom was born in Newark and I was born in Philadelphia because my dad only had a job
it
in
goes beyond
Pennsylvania.
genealogy. It goes beyond, it
Right.
goes with swagger. People here have an original walk. They walk with swagger. We're stocky people. We're bigger and stocky people. We're corn fed. People will say, so we're
Yeah,
bigger.
that's what I'm saying is that some people say, "Oh, you look like some weird Polak Jewy like New Yorker, like not New Yorker, but from like Jersey or something." But it's like, yeah, that's because it's from my mom. And then it's like being young, being born in Philly, we're in like Newark, North Jersey for a bit until there was a house bought in this Philadelphia suburbs. And it's like, okay, that's kind of weird. But it's like, yeah, it's hard to even pinpoint that to say it's like you can be born in Texas, but then you grow up in Chicago. So what does that make you?
I'm a Chicagoan, just by
Right.
how I communicate, how I deal with things. People like you, I've met dozens of people like, oh, you must be from Chicago. I go, how do you know? I goes, I was in the military. I met a lot of people from Chicago. They're always an asshole, just like you. They're always a big mouth. They're always loud. They're always like this. And it's there is something about that regional identity that might be healthy, and then there's the unhealthy stuff, and it usually resides with sports teams.
Right. Absolutely Eagles. Yeah. When I was young, when my parents would drive into Philadelphia, I would ask them, is that New York City? And they said, well, it kind of is, yeah. But it's like, no, that was a skyscraper of Philadelphia. So when I always look at the one building, there's a building in Philly that looks like a fake Chrysler building. I always got burned in my mind at 5 years old thinking that was New York, but it's Philly. And I don't know, it does something to your brain. And I always felt like deracinated from that, where it's just like, okay, it's just the city, but I never really had pride into it because I didn't know what form it takes. It's kind of like Trenton, New Jersey. Trenton, New Jersey has that sign, Trenton makes the world takes. But what is China taking from Trenton? What is India taking from Trenton? That's just like an old line that survived the 1950s. They have Taylor ham and Trenton's tomato top pizza, but I don't think the world takes those things. And yet it tells you Trenton makes the world takes. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, we were called the hog butcher capital to the world for a long time, and I don't think I'm pretty certain we are not any longer, but
Uh,
people still call us that. We have 1 minute, so we
yeah,
should probably
can you restart it? I'll start a new Zoom meeting.
right. It'll take 10 minutes probably. So
Okay.
I think
Let,
right.
let me restart it. You'll probably get the video now. Hold on.
Okay. We were talking about moving and traveling, and I was thinking about because we had to take the Zoom break that all the reasons you gave to move, moving someplace, and it's for me, it is sort of scary to move on my own to a place I know no I have no idea about. I'm only moving there because um, it's centrally located to Reno, where I'm going to be working for, which is Sabbath for the next year, and LA. It's sort of right there where I'm working, and it's a beautiful area, and the rents are affordable, and it's safe because it's a small town. So, but it's sort of scary to move there, especially
Again,
with who and what I am, and have been run out of town. So I'm like, oh, is this gonna fucking happen again? I'm gonna have grief.
again, I think ultimately people don't. Here's the thing. I think there's a fine line between people choosing where they want to live versus they have to live there because of work. So if you go on LinkedIn or you find some job and they're in Tarrytown, New York, you're going to have to probably live close to or in Tarrytown, New York for your job. And
Mm.
that's the problem is as much as you want to live in New York City, you're going to have to live in Tarrytown. And some people try to circumvent by saying, "Oh, let me do a 40-minute to an hour commute." And that does happen, but it's like, why would you when a traditional commuting means like 10 minutes, 5 minutes away? And honestly, you kind of maximize that. And I think ultimately, work is going to decide where you are, even though that is irrational, because if you want to meet fun people like yourself, you're going to have to move to places which is congregated there, but there's no promise equivalent work will be there for you. So I think that's actually the problem right now.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with you moving to where you have to work, but I've known so many people where I lived in Astoria, Oregon, very beautiful place off the right at the mouth of the Columbia River and the Pacific Ocean, just absolutely beautiful. And I knew a lot of people that would commute 2 hours back and forth to work each day, which I thought was like fucking
Yeah,
insane.
ridiculous. Yeah, unless there's no toll. Like you could
There
do
was
that
no
from
toll.
Baltimore to Philly. Like Baltimore to Philly, yeah, there's some instances of that, but it's because there's no toll driving your car. It's just like if you're in California, there's no tolls. That's why you can do that. But if there's tolls, it doesn't make sense.
Well, the toll would be driving on the side of a mountain. You have to go do that every day, so it could be dangerous. It's not. It wasn't a. It was a while. It was a rainforest, so it was like not. There was boulders that would roll down, shit like that. So I don't. I mean, that's not a technical toll, but it is. It's like for me, I just think the hours though, adding 4 hours onto my life of driving every day is like I have only so much time in my life. I don't want to
Yeah,
do.
why you could just be an Uber driver, pick your city, you
They
know.
must have been making enough money to go back and forth, I guess, but I could never understand it just because of the time. No matter what, I want to shorten my time with work, not lengthen it. You
Yep.
know,
I think most people think the same way. They want to have limited time to work with maximum profit so then they can do whatever they want. But again, I think if people had their way, people would only move to the cities, which offers the reward to the culture they want to express and be who they are, rather than forcefully move to, say, Cleveland, because that's what's open. Because economics works on supply and demand. So it's like if nobody is working in Cleveland, then the paycheck gets really high, but it doesn't really give you incentive to move there even though people don't work, because even though it might be inflated to be in Brooklyn, the issue is the trade-off is you will meet interesting people in Brooklyn than you ever would be in downtown Cleveland,
oh,
even though Cleveland gives you money.
yeah, you're telling me, man. That believe it. It goes through my head so much about leaving Chicago. I'm like, do I really want to leave Chicago? It's like it's a world class city, one of the best cities in the world, in the top probably 6 cities in the world. It's an amazing place to live. We have so many great museums. We have a great lakefront I can go to anytime for free. I don't need a car here. I take public transportation or Ubers, and it's way more affordable than owning a car. And so it's like,
Right.
fuck, do I really want to leave this? Do I really want to leave this? And I live in a great neighborhood now. It's some people would say, like it's South Side, so anything South Side is tough for people that are not from Chicago. But I live in a very Hispanic neighborhood, which I love because like it's like being in Mexico sometimes. You go, the stores are all all the signs are in Spanish. There's no English at all. And so I really love living here because it is so foreign to me that culture's, I'm not Hispanic, so it's always exciting to me.
That's like the mission in San Francisco, because the
Right, right,
mission is
right.
basically a little Mexico. That's it,
Right,
near
right, right.
Dolores Park.
Right. So it's like I love living here and I won't have that anywhere else I live. I'll just have this white American culture, which is boring to me. And in general, it is boring. Maybe it's just because it's my culture, what I understand, but I love living in Chicago. I do. But the people don't love me here like they do in California. And maybe that's I remember these guys from Sweden came over to play the Expo the Extreme in Chicago, and everyone loved them because they look so different. And the women they brought from Sweden and Scandinavia loved these Chicagoans because they were so different. These guys were really tall, long black hair, and the women here loved them. And the women that came from Scandinavia loved guys like me, like I'm short, stocky guy, whatever. They just loved us, and I think it was just because there was such an extreme difference in
Right.
our how we
I
look.
agree with that. I agree with that line. I think that that's the true form of diversity people should be after. Again, one of the big things I noticed in Atlantic City, as silly as this sounds, there was an incredible harmony between whites and blacks in Atlantic City that you wouldn't find anywhere else.
You find it
You
here. You find it in
Yeah,
Chicago.
of course, yeah, historically Chicago, but in Atlantic City, it would be like you would be walking the boardwalk. So one part would be like pro Trump, but then the next would be a T-shirt stand that says "I love black pussy," and then there's just a bunch of white guys and black girlfriends. So it's like okay, and then it's like white boy summer, Chet Hanks. So there's definitely some bizarre African American white American hybrid culture that took over Atlantic City, and it's hard to explain how that happened, but it could be from Philly, from New York, and you clash together by the beach, and then they live there. So I think there's a lot to consider there.
My guy, and the other consideration is just what you were saying. Like, I don't like to date white women anymore, American white women. Like, I don't like, I was in that. And like, anytime I start to date someone that is like an American white woman, like, I'm really turned off by your tone, even just the whole tone. I'm turned off. And I don't, it's not something I don't have a type. Like I'm like don't have like a type. It's more of an if if they're quick, they're smart, if they're interesting, that's my type. But I just don't so I'm like, man, I'm moving the world of that. There's a whole world of that out there. I don't have any is
Well,
access
I think you
to
could
different
definitely meet that in
cultures.
Portland. I think
What?
that's tons of. I think there's tons of what you're talking about. The kind of women in Portland.
What, white women?
Yeah, in
Right, that's what I'm
Portland, that
saying.
sounds
Like,
like a.
oh God, it was awful. That's right. I left and I was like, I'm glad to have left, you idiots.
That's your entire. If you start up Tinder, it's gonna be that over and over again because it's Portland.
Yeah, but in Chicago, like Hispanic women love me here. They love me. The people, and it's great, and they have a whole different culture I don't understand. So it's interesting, and it's just a different thing. I don't. There's something wrong with Americans, and I used to hate when people would say that when I was younger because I was an American, and when people would say that, it really make me angry. But there is something wrong with us here, and I always think it's because our culture is so young versus these older cultures of 20,000 years, hundreds of thousands of years they have under their belt. And that carries through into their conversations and how they see the world, what importance they put onto things. And the importance I've found in anyone that I've ever hung out with in the American world is always on material items and things that don't matter much to me, but they matter to everything about what your position is in life. All these things matter. Where in other cultures, I found it's more about the poetry of life, the smells, the colors, the what you experience every day. If you're getting out of the house, if you're doing something, what are you doing versus what do you own? It's so what do you do? And for fun, not what do you do for a living, but what do you do on your weekends? What do you do? Do you go to you know do you go play soccer? Do you do that? So I find I found that in the last handful of years. And anyway, there you go.
I mean, I totally understand about the whole neighborhood identity eclecticism. I mean, I lived in Daly City for a year, and if you know Daly City, California, that's the Filipino capital of the United States.
Nice.
So it's written in Filipino food. There's half Filipinos,
I'm
Filipino
writing this down,
Eurasians.
Daly City, so I might have to move there.
Daly City's like notoriously okay. So technically speaking, Daly City is not San Francisco. It's on the peninsula. It touches San Francisco city lines,
Too much money.
but it's about 1,000, 100 a month in the lower tier. But it's all Filipino, and it's kind of well. And so the entire culture there is Filipino markets, Filipino media. And for a second, and then there's a Jollibee's there, which is kind of like Filipino McDonald's. And for a second, you feel like, am I in the Philippines? And you're not, you're in California, but it's kind of well known that, with my wife there, I felt I was Filipino for a bit. Until then, I moved to Japantown. And then I felt like I was a little bit of like East Asian Americanism or
So
Eurasianism. I saw the complete difference there.
when you're like with my wife there, like, can we qualify? Is your wife Filipino?
My wife's Korean.
I see. So I see. I wanted to spend one of our shows talking to you about you because I'm so interested about your. And I don't know, like maybe you're Asian, you're Eurasian. I don't explain the AA
Oh
grouping.
yeah. That's AXA is kind of just an art project I've been working on to describe all the Asian American influences that I grew up with,
I
and
see. I
just
see.
it goes along with you're saying whether we're in black neighborhoods or Hispanic neighborhoods. It's like a post-racial multiculturalism and what's happening in the DIY arts,
Are you
and it's
Asian? Are
just
you part Asian?
um well you have to consider if Kazakhstani is Asian.
Okay.
If you do consider Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan in New York or Cold, some people do. Some people say that's Eurasian. Some people say no, that's Eurasian. You can't really say so. If you look at Uzbekistani people, that's like a mix between Chinese and Russian. So that's actual Eurasian we're talking about. And some of them moved to New York. And
Mm.
but again, it's like, well, today you're just seeing more Eurasianism happening. So it's not really about Kazakhstan. It's just, like you said, the example is most white women in America see themselves as women. They don't have an identity because of the white culture. And so if they don't have that, they just adopt feminism and then become hostile against men,
Yeah, man.
and
Yeah,
it
that's
doesn't work.
exactly it.
Feminism should be empowering, and it should be, I understand you as a man, and very but you're not, that Gen X ideal is gone. It means totally something else now. And so men are just rejecting that and saying, well, if I meet a Mexican woman, I can have this culture instead. And I think that's happening in large extents. And I think the largest category is Asian American for sure, because of the both sides on that. And I've been seeing that a lot in Frisco,
What do
the
you mean
entire
both sides
peninsula.
on that? What do you mean both sides on that?
Both white and Asian are just like kind of uniting and congregating in this kind of giant Eurasianism, being like, well, um, for us, white men, we don't really have anything going on. And us, Asian women, Asian men, we don't have anything going on. We want some of the liberalism here. We want some of the traditionalism there. And so if any art projects are going on, it's going to be in Eurasian neighborhoods. And I think that's happening in New York, LA, Frisco. I don't know about the Eurasianism in Chicago because it's historically black, but just like Philly is historically black city. But yeah, I think there's a lot more post-racialism going on, and this is what I talk about with my friends with all the time, is like, how black is Atlanta compared to how black Chicago is? If so, is there a subculture of whites and blacks having mulatto children and claiming a post-racial identity through that, and what would that institution look like? That's what I like talking about.
Interesting. Yeah. Wow. Well, these are great. These are great subjects.
Because again, if I'm walking Atlantic City yesterday and I see a bunch of white guys with black girlfriends and a t-shirt saying is "I love black pussy, vote Trump," what does that tell you? It's like an eclectic hybrid that's not being recorded. It's with the journalism you're talking about.
Yeah, right. And I'm only experiencing this from like totally naive an experience. Like I said, I didn't set out to date Hispanic women or anything like that. I just found uh, I've been accepted, and I appreciate that acceptance, and I have a good time hanging out with the
Yeah,
women.
you probably would be good in the Mission neighborhood in Frisco because that's all white Mexican, the Hispanic they would call it, and Mission. That's all like little Mexico in San Francisco. But I don't know how much it is. It's just, then you could say San Jose. That's like a little Mexican. That's like South Bay, and that's affordable. San Jose, it's like 2 hour and a half away from Frisco. But yeah,
Mm. San Jose. Yeah, well, interesting stuff. Yeah, I don't about moving. It scares me to move out of a big city, this big city, because I had lived outside of here for 13 years, and what I missed was having access to fucking 18 movie theaters, and they're all art house. Like Chicago has probably a half a dozen art house film houses, like small places that you could see.
right.
Portland doesn't have that. I don't think they have.
You have it in the Mission, the Roxy Theater, and I've seen some interesting films there. The Roxy in Frisco, that's near Mission too.
Yeah,
That's a good theater.
Frisco had, and if I moved to the city I'm looking at, Frisco is near, and so I do think Frisco is culturally balanced still, and they have some decent museums in that area. Portland doesn't. Portland's awful, and every kind of culture they have there is awful. All they have is donut culture, croissant culture. I
They don't
found
even have a proper university there. It's like what, Portland State and Lewis and Clark. It's like no name universities too in Portland. It's like not even academia too. They don't excel.
right. Well, there you go. I don't know about that, but I know that I did not like that. That place was very boring to me. The whole, that all of that was boring. Seattle was okay, but not the greatest. You know.
I'm curious about Seattle because I hear that the Eurasianism is much higher in Seattle than Frisco. Because the Eurasianism is incredibly high in Frisco, like Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Filipino, like it's more Asian, Eurasian than it is white. But then it's like I hear Seattle, that's kind of like, okay, Mount Rainier looks like Mount Fiji, um, Fuji, and whatever. And then it's like, okay, you got your fake Japan near Vancouver, and Nintendo's there of America. So it's like, I'm always curious about it, and it looks kind of like Frisco, but not really. And but it, like you said, it has that Nirvana white grunge, so it's like I don't know if it lives up to that. So
You're funny how you see this stuff. Yeah, in Chicago, you said it was like a notoriously black culture or black city, and I see it more Hispanic. Like it's a Hispanic city. Like
yeah, I mean it's like Miami. Miami's like very I love Miami. Miami's pretty cool, and that's like all Cuban, Puerto Rican, Mexican. I mean, you could say that about parts of Texas, but it's like really like Spanish in Miami to such an extent that feels like a little different country. But again, what's going on in Miami other than shooting porn films and rich people stuff?
Yeah, Miami's not the best. I don't like Miami.
But yeah, I think it's an interesting to talk about those eclectic differences because again, you could be in Corpus Christi, Texas, the beach near Houston, and everybody is Mexican, Hispanic, but you don't have like black. And so the culture mashes between Spanish and English. And you just think of yourself as Spanish, even though that kind of creates your own desire in itself. But then again, if you're out in, Kansas City, Missouri, it's like that's where all the Taylor Swift fans are. And then you get kind of where the aesthetics, where the culture motifs, and then you start to put the Kansas City people in Corpus Christi, then they can't handle it because becomes their own culture shock that they weren't ready for that. And so I think that's a part of the conflict. What we're seeing is that many people are projecting upon the world that all cities are like this city, but it's actually more diverse than what we think is really going on.
Cities are more diverse, you say?
I think it's like more like when we talk about regional identity, we're talking about like what makes these cities unique. And I think the people make the cities unique. Like you said, there's a Chicago person, New Yorker, a Philly person. But I do think there is this kind of similarity where the people invested in there all have some different culture going on that does shock others. That's more like what we think. It's like not the city person anymore. It's not this easy thing that we could just peg in and say all cities are like this. It's more like the people there start thinking everybody's like them or something. That's what I'm just trying to get out.
Chicago, I found, and they, everyone here tries to have this individual. I hate to be this old because it's like they used to be like that. Maybe I'm just out of touch, but it used to be everyone here tried to have their own walk, their own swagger, their own style. No one was trying to fit in. They were trying to have this individual flair, and that's something I haven't seen in San Francisco necessarily, or New York even. You know,
Like what I get from Philly is that there still is a white black divide in Philly. North Philly being all black, West Philly being all whites. But a majority of West Philly are from people who live in the Philadelphia suburbs that white flighted out of the city during the last 100 years and then came back into the city for whatever reasons, and they want to retain the culture of Taylor Swift stuff on the west side, and Black America is on the north side, wanting to retain that. And I think there's an incredible clash between what is an inner city person. Do you think you're a tough guy? Do you think you are a slut? Do you think and the thing is, these are not empowering titles. They're more like self-destructive identity things that feel way too it's almost like it's celebrating like white trash culture to an extent that's like dumb and self-destructive. You certainly wouldn't want to celebrate a culture of like blacks killing each other or whites killing each other. And I
oh,
think you get that a lot.
I never saw shit like Chicago culture. The women here were faster, and things were tougher, but I never saw it as self-destructive or anything like that. I saw it as more like fearless. You can't show fear in a city or you'll be eaten alive. It's a survival of the fittest in urban areas. Awful. It certainly is. And so I saw things as just faster, and people from the suburbs where I came from slower. You know, but I didn't see it like that. Like I think when suburbanites come here and try to define themselves as city people, it's weird. And in Chicago, there was a place that was Wicker Park. And when I was younger, you couldn't get a cab driver to drop you off in that neighborhood at night. Now it's like little Schaumburg. Schaumburg's a suburb of Chicago where some of the first malls in America were built out there. Woodfield Mall. And so it's all malls. And so it's like, but now Chicago has a lot of areas where suburbanites have moved in and taken over, and it's become like a suburb. Like they brought out their culture here. And coming back here after 13 years, what I was fucking blown away by was how many Targets are in the city in Chicago proper. And I was like, what in the fuck would we need a Target in Chicago for? We have everything. Like we have everything in Chicago and they're all mom and pop stores, and so that was really upsetting to me, to see the Targets, but that's what
Right.
this urban
That's
culture.
what I found about Philadelphia too. It feels like when you go over to West Philadelphia, it's all white. You go to North Philadelphia, it's all black. It's still racially segregated, but they just don't bring it up, And it feels a little more like a phony type of multiculturalism. Unlike Atlantic City, what I'm saying is the whites and blacks are mingling and having their own weird culture about it. They're becoming mulatto,
Yeah,
but the
but
culture
do they live there or are they tourists?
it's hard to say. I think these are people who got stuck in Atlantic City, couldn't go to Philly or New York, and then both white and black merged together and they created this weird white boy summer Afrosexual culture that developed there. I'm saying is that Philadelphia seems more like a little commuter city for, whites in the suburban area to do work there, but not mingle with others. They want to retain being white in their suburbs and just work in Philly and then just reap everything out. And then when they're done, they go back to the burbs or something. I don't know. I just been seeing that in Philadelphia. But again, you go to New York, you go to Frisco, even parts of LA, it seems like there's an incredible clash that is not apparent in Philly. Philly seems a little segregated between white or black, and it doesn't really feels very privatized. What I'm trying to say.
Los Angeles is such a perverse city, though, because it's like, and maybe it is because of all the suburbanites that moved in there to be big in Hollywood. The people that have been born and raised in Los Angeles are really cool. But I hate every single person I've met there that's moved there from Canada or wherever else they have moved.
Right. And it's impossible because then you move there and like rent's $4,000 a month, and it's like here's the thing. I like San Diego more. San Diego makes sense, but like LA does not. It's a little overrated just because of Hollywood's there. But it's like if I think San Diego is more if you want to cut normal living, and I think
Yeah,
there's a lot to do in San Diego.
San Diego's, I don't like that either, but it's like a military town. So it's
Right.
like I didn't like that, I don't feel like that's normal. I'm from Chicago, so I have a this is a
Well, remember you're next to Tijuana, so you could take a train to Tijuana and go in Mexico for a day, and then come back to San Diego in a
well,
single
that's
night.
cool. That's cool. That's a cool bonus, but I'm spoiled being in Chicago because it's so big, it's so diverse, it's so cultural, it's just a real special place to have grown up in. And it makes every other place boring a lot,
I
often.
understand. Yeah,
So
I see. I feel the same way about New York. I feel like if you're in New York, if you're in Flushing or Long Island, why would you care about any other city? The problem is money. Can you afford it? And can I have a normal living here? Everything is beautiful in New York. The problem is the other people that may stop you from doing that. Again, 9 million people. That's like 9 cities in one. It's crazy.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. So talking about this is making me almost weird about leaving Chicago now.
Right, right. I always think about, that's why some other people, if they can't live in New York, they go to North Jersey or, South New York State. And so around the Jersey area, that's where there's a lot of weird stuff being built up where not only you can have a family, but it's just like it's the walkable community ideal. The reason why Frisco is so cool is that when you're in Japantown on Cathedral Hill, you can just walk anywhere. Yeah, sure, there's homeless people, whatever, but you can still walk everywhere. You don't need an Uber. Same with Manhattan. Same with, all the trains are connected from Jersey to Newark to New York. You just hop on a train. Philadelphia, you really can't walk. It's their center city, but like you need a car to get anywhere because it was made for like horse and buggy stuff. And so as long as the city is like you have to have a car, it loses its point. It's just like you're driving places or whatever. And I think people can really, if you've ever been to Santa Cruz, it's like there's a giant boardwalk in Santa Cruz. You can walk that boardwalk and know the university, the library, the houses, and you can live just on that boardwalk and call that city Santa Cruz. And that's because it caters to walking. You don't have to drive out. And I feel like if the city doesn't have a walkable community, it's not even worth the point because you might as well be in Cheyenne, Wyoming or something.
Truth. That's something I definitely look for, is something that I can walk to everything I need, or it's what you're
And
talking
then you
about.
tell people, hey, come to Santa Cruz. I have a house in Santa Cruz and this is the best city in the world. And then you start, thinking the world is Santa Cruz or something. But again, that's how I think a lot of people felt about Frisco. A lot of people felt about New York, but they've been I guess that's like in a magnified version of Portland. I think Portland was probably a huge walkable community at one point in time, but now it's like, what's the point? It's too isolated, or it's too yeah, I
Definitely,
think you
definitely
give
got to
people
drive.
the walkable community, then the artist can walk to where he has to go. Like I can see in Frisco, if I want to go to Outer Sunset, Inner Sunset, the Mission, Dolores Park, you name it, I'm walking there in 30 minutes. I'll see you there. See, I don't need anything. And it looks pretty to walk. You walk a hill on Alamo Square. I got to go to a show,
Right, right.
whatever. Right.
And most everything in Chicago you can walk to. Like, well, I wouldn't say we're big, but if any neighborhood you're in, you can get most anything you want just walking around. Like any your shoes repaired, your vacuum clean, every single fucking thing you can get.
Right.
Any
That's like New
neighborhood.
York. It's exactly like New York City. And that's why I like New York so much is that I'll just
Right.
walk there. It doesn't matter.
I wish the cities didn't overprice the artists. I'd love to do is find an artist community I could move into. I used to think Detroit might be that because they offered homes to artists for $500, but it didn't turn out that way.
Yeah, I hear a lot of stories from Detroit. Um, I hear the Detroit stories are becoming the city's so poor that it's trying to attract coolness because it's anything but Chicago or anything but Cleveland. But again, it's in like the north. It's next to Winster, and it's just like gives a very weird vibe, Detroit. So yeah, I just heard horror stories that people tried to move there, but it's so run down and broken. It's like, what's the point?
Yeah, it's lawless. It's totally lawless there. So it's like it's a rough city. It's a tough city. I wish I could find an artist community to move to. I was really happy to grow up in Chicago and be a part of the Wicker Park art scene when it was cool, when it was like there was still beat poets that were living there. Nelson Algren, was living there, and a cafe he wrote most of his work was there. You could go in there and have fried eggs or whatever. And it was such a cool time, man. This whole Flatiron building was full of artists, and the guy that owned it was a total scumbag, ripped off everything and gave every artist their sweetheart lease of 10 years before he left because he was doing all his crimes or whatever. And when they took the building from him, he was out of the country by then. But the bank had to come in and negotiate with all these artists because we had 10-year leases. So it's like it was just the greatest area. And boy, I wish
Right.
I could find something like that. I wish that still existed.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to do that in Japantown and Daly City for a bit last year, but it's just, again, Frisco's too privatized. Everybody's out of the state doing their business. Everybody has a job. And again, if you don't have wealthy connections, nobody can be there. So it's just like a weird, and then
I
that's why I feel about Philly too. If Philly feels a little too divided. It feels
there's
like
this
just,
there's this idea amongst realtors called creative class. And I used to have this website called Creative Class Trumps Ruling Class. And I would try to get artists together. Like I wanted to get a group of artists together to go in and make a deal with a dying city. To go, we can rehab this. We're a group of artists. We want 3 city blocks. We give us those buildings. They're all run down. We'll fix them up. We'll make this city cool. And then we'd own those, just like like they tried to do in Detroit. But at that time, I would also it'd be like a planned community, get these people together and start getting our friends to move in, and then have political power, so our taxes didn't get raised out of a place where we couldn't afford. And I wish I could have. I still wish I could do that somehow, but people just don't get together on those. They don't understand it. They don't believe the power of artists in this world. But
right.
realtors do. Realtors will buy up an artist community real quick, and that's why I thought we should take advantage.
I think the problem is they only think it could be in major cities. They only think it could be New York, LA, Frisco, whatever. And if you're not, then get out. And that's the I mean the other city that they're building up and pushing is Houston. In fact, I was told, to get my PhD in Houston as well, because Houston's been building up. That's where Musk is setting base, and it's Texas. It's really cheap, and Houston's building. They're building a train from Galveston to Houston. They're really building up like this cyber city out there, and it's growing in population. It's just right under Chicago with like 4 million people, 3 million people. So yeah, I'm just like I could get a PhD there, but it's just it's hard to take a risk in Houston. It's the cowboy culture, it's the whatever. You just have to tell people to move, but it's like again, it's like if you don't have the money, then you're not going to get the incentive to go there. And it's like I guess Houston's somewhere in the center, but I don't know. It's Texas. It's like weird. It's like the other nearby city is New Orleans, and it's like what, you know?
Yeah, I'm not keen on Texas at all.
Yeah, they're
Not
trying to build it up. They're trying to get all the hipsters and all the people into Houston because of the tech stuff. And that's the whole, and it's true. Yeah, it's Republican, it's cheap, whatever, but it's like it's not the culture. It doesn't match. So you're just having constant build up and constant higher wager. But then it's like, okay, then fifth biggest city would be Phoenix. But Phoenix is only big is because all the Hollywood actor rejects who couldn't make it in LA moved to Phoenix. That's why Phoenix is big. And then Philadelphia, sixth biggest city. Phoenix is like 2 million, Philly's like 1.8 mil. And what Philly is, I just said, all the New Yorkers who couldn't make it in New York, so they start families in Philly is the
the
same
only
effect with Phoenix to LA.
Chicago's great, but like I said, they're not encouraging of success or any kind of growing outside of the group. New Orleans was the one of the greatest cities for artists, and they were and they still are very supportive of their art scene. And in the Pacific Northwest, that's something that they really found important was art and artists. And there's a lot of grants and a lot of uh, treating artists special there. So I really like the Pacific Northwest for that reason. But those are the only spots in America that I've found that have any kind of understanding of the importance of art and artists.
But then it comes with, like you said, the kind of tardy white people that just only
Right.
care about suburban living and just mind your own business. I want my racist white community, get out.
Not New Orleans. The New Orleans things is very black oriented
Right,
and
right.
oriented.
Very, very black.
Chocolate City. Yeah, so it's like I really liked all those areas. I was treated well, and that's why if I could live anywhere, it would be outside of the country. I would want to move to South America, probably.
Well, you got, well, it's hard to say with the safety of Brazil or Sao Paulo. Maybe Santiago in Chile, but that's a little too south. Um,
Yeah, but they treat artists well there, and so I
mm.
want to go to any culture that treats artists like almost like religious people, like a
I mean,
priest.
there's Havana in Cuba, but
Yeah,
Hemingway, and I think to be in Cuba, you just have to borrow at least $30,000. Then you're considered rich there in Cuba, and then just learn some Spanish, and you're pretty good to go. And just
really.
find your vape. Yeah, that's what I heard. That's why Hemingway went to Cuba, Havana, and it's like that. You just gotta know some Spanish, know the culture, borrow $30,000, and now you're rich there. And then buy some big property, and then yeah, I've heard some people who made it in Cuba before, but again, it's like it requires a lot of work, and I don't think their Wi-Fi is up to par. That's because it's their, America is going to war with Cuba, so it's like what the fuck. So it's like you have to find other ways, like honestly on Telegram or use the internet when nobody's looking. And it's like it's kind of hard to do that.
Well, that's a fine trade-off if I find peace and appreciation for art in a way that's not so sales based, you know.
Mm.
I so that's where I'd love to move to South America somewhere maybe, but maybe not.
I think about that too. I think, well, there was that whole thing with whites when they were like, I'm threatening to move to Canada. But I think Canada has now went to move to America too. I think Toronto was that huge city people would go to and say, well, I can be an artist here. And it's like, I think that was a thing in the 90s
Right.
with Seth and Chester Brown and Joe Matt. But it's like, that's gone, you
Right.
know.
Right. And it's hard not to look back to set up, to look for your precedent on where you could go. It's the times have changed, and I wonder if art communities are even anywhere but online. If it
And if
matters.
you're online, what's stopping you from being in Norristown, Pennsylvania? And it's like
Right.
nobody's in Norristown. It doesn't make any sense. I might as well be in Jackson, Mississippi. It's like, what's
Right.
the point?
Right. So I think all of these communities have gone online and they're satisfied with that electronic existence. And I'm from a time where it was more physical. We were there. We were collaborating in the real in a coffee shop, and that's so important to me. So I feel like I'm stuck in the past, but I don't.
Well,
That's
I think that's
that's something
absolutely
I
true.
enjoy. I enjoyed that, so I want it back. I do want it back, even if it doesn't exist anymore. It's something I enjoyed.
Well, I liked board game night because on Wednesday or Thursday night, you go meet a
Right.
bunch of friends who are into Dungeons and Dragons. Then we play board games when we play a game. And the games are a type of artistic creation through game design. And that's kind of really popular in that, Pennsylvania, I would say Chicago area too, depending Midwest, like Indiana, that's where Gen Con is. But I think board game playing was a way, in my opinion, to meet physical people and play games that are not video games and play and talk about game design. And that I felt that was the communal release in my neighborhood of Philadelphia. But again, that's very niche. Not New Yorkers don't play that. That's kind of like a weird thing. So again, it's hard to say that which each regional area you're forced to do. There's only like one board game store, the Gamescape in San Francisco. So it's like you go there Wednesday night, but it's only for 3 hours. I'm talking about like 6, 7 hours of just being in a room playing games with like new people you met and just games and just talking like we're doing. But yeah, it's like even hard to tell musicians to meet together and make music or like
Right.
artists to
And,
paint
and,
stuff.
and what I'm talking about is a neighborhood where you literally walk down to a coffee shop and it's full of artists. So you're collaborating without even wanting to. You're sitting next to someone, they say something, they go, hey, I have an answer for that. I know where you can get that. I know where you can do that. And it's like an accident you're collaborating. You're so close and hearing each other and
Right. I
smell
mean,
each
I would
other.
go to Noisebridge in the Mission. That's where there was Electronic Music Monthly. We would play electronic music every 4 weeks. Then I think every other week was a creative writing workshop. But yeah,
San
Noisebridge in
Francisco's too
Frisco,
much money.
it's too much. Yeah, that's the point. So who's going to go to Noisebridge
You
outside of
can't.
San Jose? It takes 2 hours.
That's like
So
Patti Smith. She talks about don't move to New York to be an artist. That world is gone. You need a place where you can afford to be poor and broke and just invest in your art. And there's nothing like that in the New York area she was talking about. And it's the same. Maybe Chicago still has places like that, but those neighborhoods are for younger people because they're very risky. We have less than a minute, so
we should do a cliffhanger here and just
yeah,
get this on next time.
okay, yeah, ShaneBugbee.com. Go there. What do you got? You got a website?
This is www.pilleater.com and youtube.com/pilleater.
We're the cliffhanger next. What are we going to talk about next week? What are we cliffhanging?
Well, we talked about city pride today, so I think we should go back to like what it means to be a commune, the Epicurean society or something, what it means to be an artist and meet people.
I love it. I love talking to
Because
you.
I
Okay.
feels like we were talking about city pride and regional identity, what it means, and then we're gonna talk about DIY, the collective. What is it? Was an Epicurean society? Seems
I
like we're
love
really
it.
talking about it.
I love it.
All right, that's cool.
I love talking with you, Joe. Thanks a lot.
All right, Shane, next time.
Peace.